When God gives you something big, you will see these signs, ladies and gentlemen. There comes a time in life when you can feel it. Something is shifting, something is changing. You've been working, praying, pushing forward, and suddenly there's this sense that something big is about to happen. But here's the thing, when God is getting ready to elevate you, it won't always come the way you expect. It won't always look like a blessing at first. In fact, the signs that something great is coming are often the very things that make most people want to give up. The struggle gets harder. The obstacles seem bigger. The waiting feels longer. And in those moments, doubt starts creeping in. But what if I told you that those challenges aren't signs that you're failing? They're signs that God is moving. What if I told you that the pressure you're feeling isn't there to break you, but to build you? Because when God gives you something big, you will see these signs. And if you recognize them, if you hold on, if you stay in faith, then you'll be ready for what's on the other side. Let's talk about it. Yeah. When life is about to take you to another level, when God is preparing something big for you, the first thing you're going to notice is that opposition increases. It won't be small problems. No, it'll feel like everything around you is trying to push you back. The moment you start to feel that weight, that resistance, that's when you know God is up to something in your life. See, the enemy doesn't fight people who aren't a threat. If you were just staying in the same place, if you were just doing what's easy, you wouldn't see this kind of opposition. But when your purpose starts calling you, when that breakthrough is around the corner, suddenly the storms come. People will start doubting you. Some of the people closest to you, the ones you thought would always be in your corner, they'll start questioning you. They'll say, "Are you sure about this? Maybe you should play it safe. Maybe this isn't for you." And it won't just be people. Life itself will test you. Things will stop working the way they used to. Doors that should be open will slam shut. You'll start to wonder, "Oh, why is this happening to me?" But I'll tell you, it's because God is shifting you. He's stretching you. And stretching is uncomfortable. Pressure is uncomfortable. But pressure is what turns coal into diamonds. Resistance is what builds strength. And let me tell you something, the greater the blessing, the greater the opposition. If you're facing trials you've never seen before, it's because God is preparing to take you places you've never been before. Every great leader, every great success story has faced moments where it felt like all hell was breaking loose in their lives. But that's when you've got to hold on. That's when you've got to remind yourself, if the pressure is increasing, if the struggle is intensifying, then my breakthrough must be close. The second sign is that the opportunities God gives you will seem impossible. Now, that might not make sense at first, but stay with me. See, when God gives you something big, it's not going to be something you can handle on your own. It's going to look too big, too overwhelming, too out of reach. That's how you know it's from Him. Because if you could do it by yourself, you wouldn't need faith. And God doesn't move through logic. He moves through faith. Think about David. When he stood in front of Goliath, that wasn't a fair fight. The odds weren't in his favor. The world looked at him and said, "That's impossible." But God doesn't work with what the world sees. He works with what He has placed inside of you. He knew David didn't need to be stronger than Goliath. He just needed to trust in something bigger than Goliath. Maybe right now you're looking at an opportunity in your life, and everything in you is saying, "I don't have what it takes. I don't have the right connections. I don't have the resources." But I want you to hear me. God doesn't need you to have it all. He just needs you to be willing. If He put that vision in your heart, if He placed that dream inside of you, it's because He's already made a way for it to happen. Your job isn't to figure it all out. Your job is to step forward, even when you don't see the whole path. And that's where the third sign comes in. Your faith will be tested. Now, it's one thing to believe in something when everything is going well. It's easy to trust when the sun is shining, when the bank account looks good, when everybody is cheering you on. But what about when the road gets dark? What about when the prayers seem unanswered? What about when every step forward feels like two steps back? That's when real faith is revealed. God doesn't just give out big blessings without preparation. He's got to know that you can handle what He's about to give you. So He'll test you, not to break you, but to strengthen you. When God told Abraham to sacrifice his son, it wasn't because He wanted to take something away from him. It was because He wanted to see if Abraham trusted Him enough to let go. And the moment Abraham proved his faith, God provided. Right now, you might be in the middle of a test. You might be in a place where you're wondering, God, where are you? Why is this so hard? But what you don't realize is that the test is a setup. It's proof that something greater is coming. God will always test before he blesses. He'll always stretch before he elevates. He's watching to see, will you still trust him when it doesn't make sense? Will you still move forward when the path isn't clear? Because if you can stand in faith when everything is shaking, if you can keep pushing when everything in you wants to quit, then you're ready for what he has in store. When God gives you something big, it will never be something that fits neatly into your current abilities. It will always seem impossible. It will be beyond what you can handle on your own, and that's intentional. See, if the opportunity in front of you looks easy, if it's something you can accomplish with what you already have, then it's not from God. God doesn't give assignments that don't require faith. He doesn't give visions that fit within your comfort zone. He gives you something that forces you to rely on him, something that stretches you, something that seems so far beyond your reach that you have no choice but to trust in a power greater than yourself. When Moses stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army closing in behind him, the situation looked impossible. There was no logical way out. There was no clear solution. He had no weapons, no army, no bridge to cross the sea. Everything about that moment should have led to defeat. What Moses didn't realize was that the impossibility of his situation was actually proof that God was about to move. When the situation looks hopeless, that's when God does his best work. When the odds are against you, that's when he shows up in ways you never expected. That's how you know when an opportunity is from God. It won't be something you can just walk into on your own. It will be something that requires a level of trust that doesn't always make sense. People will look at you and say, that's too big for you. You're not qualified. You don't have enough experience. You don't have the right background. And if you're not careful, you might start believing them. You might start thinking, maybe I'm not ready for this. Maybe I should wait. Maybe I should aim for something smaller. But the truth is, if God put that opportunity in front of you, it means he's already made a way for it to happen. It means he's already seen the path, even if you haven't. Think about Gideon. When God called him to lead an army against the Midianites, Gideon didn't feel qualified. He saw himself as weak, as insignificant. He even questioned God, asking, "Are you sure you mean me?" And God's response wasn't to make the situation easier for Gideon. In fact, he made it harder. He told Gideon to reduce his army from 32,000 men down to 300. He took an impossible situation and made it even more impossible. Why? Because he wanted to make it clear that the victory wouldn't come from Gideon's strength, it would come from God's power. That's the pattern. When God gives you something big, he makes sure you can't take credit for it. He puts you in a position where when you finally overcome, you'll have no choice but to say, that was God. That wasn't me. That was him making a way when there was no way. So when you're standing in front of an opportunity that seems too big, too overwhelming, too impossible, don't walk away from it. Don't shrink back. Don't let fear convince you that you're not ready, because if God put you there, then you are ready. If he opened that door, it's because he's already given you everything you need to walk through it. And here's the thing, God's opportunities don't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes they come disguised as problems. Sometimes they come wrapped in obstacles. Sometimes the thing that looks like a setback is actually a setup for something greater. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused and thrown into prison. At every stage, it looked like his dreams were impossible. It looked like the very thing God had promised him was never going to happen. But what Joseph didn't see in those moments was that every hardship, every obstacle, every setback was actually moving him closer to the fulfillment of that promise. That's why you can't let impossibility scare you. You can't let the size of the challenge convince you that it's not for you. The very fact that it seems impossible is proof that God is involved. If it was easy, it wouldn't require faith. If it was simple, it wouldn't require growth. But God is not in the business of keeping you comfortable. He's in the business of taking you higher. And every time he takes you higher, the challenges get bigger. Every time he promotes you, the obstacles become greater. But so does his provision, so does his strength, and so does his power working in your life. When God gives you something big, your faith will be tested. It won't be a light test, an easy test, or something you can just brush off. No, it will be a test that shakes you, that makes you question everything, that forces you to dig deep and decide whether you truly trust God or not. See, faith isn't just about believing when things are good. Faith isn't just about feeling inspired when everything is going your way. Faith is about what you do when the storm comes, when the waiting gets long, when the answers don't come the way you expected. When God gives you a vision, a purpose, a calling, there will always be a season where it feels like nothing is happening. You'll pray and it'll feel like silence. You'll work and it'll seem like no progress is being made. You'll believe and things will look like they're getting worse instead of better. That's when the real test begins, because it's in those moments that people either press forward or give up. It's in those moments that people either say, God, I trust you even when I don't understand, or they say, maybe I heard wrong. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should quit. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations, but the test came in the waiting. Years went by and nothing happened. Decades passed and the promise still hadn't come to life. Everything in the natural told him it was impossible. He and Sarah were too old. There was no logical way for it to happen. And that's when many people lose faith. That's when people start to compromise, start to force things to happen in their own strength, start to settle for something less than what God promised. But faith is not about what you see. It's about what you believe even when you don't see it. Faith is about trusting that God is still working, even when every sign around you says otherwise. Sometimes the test of faith is not just about waiting. It's about obedience. It's about whether or not you're willing to follow God even when it doesn't make sense. When God told Noah to build an ark, there was no rain. There was no flood. People probably laughed at him, mocked him, told him he was crazy. But Noah's faith wasn't in what he could see. It was in what God said. That's the level of faith God is looking for. The kind of faith that says, I don't need to see the evidence yet. If God told me to do it, I'm going to do it. And here's what makes the test even harder. It usually comes right before the breakthrough. The moment when things feel the hardest, the moment when you feel the weakest, the moment when you start to wonder if you should just give up. That's usually when you're closest to stepping into what God has for you. The enemy knows it. He knows that if he can get you to quit in the test, you'll never reach the promise. He knows that if he can make you doubt God now, you'll never get to see what was waiting on the other side of your obedience. Look at Job. He lost everything. His wealth, his family, his health. And in the middle of his suffering, people told him to curse God, to give up, to stop believing. And that's how the test works. Because the enemy knows that faith isn't real if it only exists when things are good. True faith is proven in the fire. True faith is shown when everything is falling apart, but you still say, I trust you, God. I don't understand, but I trust you. I don't see a way out, but I trust you. I don't feel strong enough, but I trust you. When Jesus was in the boat with the disciples and the storm hit, they panicked. They were afraid. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and in their minds, they were about to drown. And Jesus was sleeping because he wasn't moved by the storm. He was moved by faith. And when they woke him up, he didn't say, oh, you're right. This storm is really bad. No, he said, where is your faith? Because the test wasn't about the storm. It was about whether or not they believed he was still in control even when things looked chaotic. That's the same test you will face when God gives you something big. It won't always be easy. It won't always happen on your timeline. It won't always look the way you expected it to look. But God will use that test to grow you, to strengthen you, to prepare you. Because he's not just interested in getting you to the blessing. He's interested in making sure you're ready for it when it comes. If your faith can stand through the storm, if your trust can remain even when the answers don't come right away, then you are ready for what's next. So now you know, when God gives you something big, you will see these signs. The opposition will increase. The opportunities will seem impossible, and your faith will be tested. But these are not signs to turn back. These are not signs to doubt. These are confirmations that you are right where you need to be. The enemy wouldn't fight you this hard if you weren't a threat. The obstacles wouldn't look this big if the blessing wasn't greater. The test wouldn't be this intense if the breakthrough wasn't close. So don't give up. Don't shrink back. Don't let fear, doubt, or delay make you walk away from what God is trying to give you. Because when you hold on, when you trust, when you push through the storm, that's when you step into the blessing that was always meant for you. That's when you see what God was preparing all along. That's when you realize that everything you went through wasn't meant to stop you. It was meant to shape you for something greater.